Welcome back. In that introduction, you heard a man named Andrew E. Yelling, who is a U.S. attorney, speak at the Department of Justice about the college admissions scandal in the U.S. The video was posted by CBS News, and I'll go ahead and provide the link in the transcript if you'd like to see the full version of that video. So in light of this recent news, in today's lesson, I'm going to briefly talk about the scandal and about college in the United States and what it's like to actually go through the admission process. But before we begin, let's go ahead and do an expression, a joke, and some other English exercises. So here's the joke. Why did the picture go to jail? Any ideas? Because it was framed. So why is this funny? Well, to frame as a verb has two meanings. You can frame a picture and hang it on your wall, but you can also frame a person. This is when you produce false evidence to make someone look guilty. So, why did the picture go to jail? Because it was framed, right? It was literally framed, and perhaps someone made it look guilty. What inspired me to choose that one is, of course, the topic of the day and also the expression to cut corners. We'll start by going through the definition of each individual word, and then I'll give you some more examples to help you use it in your English conversations. So, to. To is a preposition that indicates direction. He's going to the park. In other words, he's going in the direction of the park. It's also an infinitive marker. For example, I want to go home to see my grandmother, right? To go and to see are in the infinitive. Cut. Cut means to make an opening or incision with a sharp-edged tool or object. Corners. A corner is a place or an angle where two sides meet. I live on Washington Street. You live on Pacific. Let's meet at the corner. Or on the corner of Washington and Pacific. Of course, we also use corners to express remoteness. So at the Polyglot Conference, people came from all corners of the world. I can also say all corners of the planet, all corners of the continent, etc. The expression to cut corners means to take on a task in the easiest, fastest, or cheapest way using the least amount of time, effort, or resources necessary. When someone cuts corners, usually they ignore the rules. Sometimes the result can be illegal. So the origin of the expression, well, it comes from the 1800s. It was first used to express how people could shorten their distance traveled by cutting corners. Makes sense, right? In any case, let's go ahead and do a listen and repeat exercise so that you can practice your pronunciation. We'll use the phrase, don't cut corners. In other words, don't take an easier, cheaper, or faster route that ignores the rules. So, repeat after me. Don't. Don't cut. Don't cut corners. Don't cut corners. Don't cut corners. Don't cut corners. Now the conjugation. Repeat after me. I cut corners. You cut corners. He cuts corners. She cuts corners. We cut corners. They cut corners. All right. So in order to help you kind of get a better feel for how this expression is used, I'm going to give you a few examples. So listen carefully. Example number 1. A few years ago, one of the biggest banks in the United States, Wells Fargo, was caught in a scandal for cutting corners. So what happened? Well, employees within the company had quotas for the number of accounts they needed to open per quarter. Since the quotas were challenging to meet, many employees decided to open fake accounts with real customers' social security numbers. Right? And social security numbers are these numbers that each individual has that's connected to their banking, to their taxes, to everything that's really important. So by cutting corners, by taking the easiest, fastest, and cheapest route, they were able to reach their quotas. They tried to cheat the system by cutting corners, by taking a shortcut, and were caught. Example number 2. When my brother and I were young, we were required to write and present a lot of book reports for school. Many kids, including my brother, tried to cut corners. Instead of reading the books and writing the reports, they would try to find easy or quick alternatives. I remember one time my brother needed to write a report on the book Holes, and instead of reading the book, he took a shortcut. He cut corners. He went to the movies and saw the movie version of Holes. When he gave his oral presentation, the teacher asked him questions about events that only happened in the book. She put him on the spot and he could not answer. He cut corners and he was caught. Example number 3. The college admissions scandal is a hot topic right now in the U.S., and it serves as proof that some very rich and famous individuals were able to get into the U.S.'s most prestigious schools by cutting corners. Instead of going through the regular admissions process like the rest of us, some were able to cut corners by bribing college admissions officials, coaches, and other university officials to be accepted. In other words, they ignored the rules and found an easier and faster route to overcome the obstacle of college admissions. They cheated, and they're currently being caught. So I don't know if you've been following it, but the news stories have been pretty crazy. They just keep coming out about new people being charged of fraud. So on a side note, to cut corners is not to be confused with take cuts. I've heard some of my students do this before. We used to take cuts to illustrate someone is cutting in line, or in British English, in a queue. For example, someone at a concert who takes cuts or cuts the line to skip others does not wait their turn. They cut to get ahead of others and enter first, right? This is not the same as cut corners. Remember, cut corners is to get ahead in a project or an obstacle. So let's get to the fact of the day, right? So speaking of cutting corners and the college admissions scandal, we're going to talk about what it's like to get into college in the U.S. But before we begin, let's do a refresher on some terminology used to talk about levels of education. We say preschool for the school you go to from ages 3 to 4. Elementary school from age 5 to 12. Middle school from about age 12 to 14. And high school from about age 14 to 18. In the United States, we use the term college to describe all educational institutions after high school. Most often it describes a place where you can get a 4-year degree. So there are a few different types of colleges in the U.S. I'll just name the most common. So private and public universities, state schools, community colleges, and trade schools. So trade schools are also known as vocational schools or vocational colleges, and they teach you a certain skill. So someone who wants to be a hairstylist, maybe a cosmetologist, an electrician, maybe a welder, massage therapist, they might go to a trade school. Community colleges are smaller and more affordable, and also less competitive than state schools or universities. And many cities have their own community colleges. There are a lot of high school grads who choose to go there because they can save a little bit of money for the first few years and then transfer to a state school or university. Also, really great one if you want to do an exchange in the United States. Highly recommend community college in Santa Barbara. It overlooks the ocean. Take a look online. Public universities or state schools are partially owned by the state. And because of that, they have lower tuitions or in-state tuitions for students who are from that state. And why? Well, it's actually pretty simple because their tax dollars have been used to support the school. So at public and state schools, students who are from other states need to pay what we call out-of-state tuition, which is significantly higher. Private universities or private schools are, of course, privately owned. A good example of some private universities are the Ivy League schools. There are 8 schools or 8 colleges that are considered Ivy League, and you probably know them if you're interested in education or higher education in the U.S. There's Yale, Harvard, Princeton, Dartmouth, Brown, Columbia, Cornell, and UPenn, or the University of Pennsylvania. And these are highly regarded for their academic excellence and are also therefore very highly selective. Just to give you an idea, in 2018, Harvard received 42,742 applications, from which only 4.59% were accepted. That's according to the Harvard Crimson. Competitive, huh? Well, what's the application process or the admission process really like? So most schools in the process of looking for new students for the upcoming class look at a combination of your grades, your SAT or ACT score. These are 2 very long standardized tests we take during our year of high school or during our junior year, and essays in which we need to express who we are and why we think we belong at a certain school. Some of the essays, of course, vary. And of course, some schools also have interviews, but I think those are sort of the small colleges or small universities. So having perfect grades and perfect SAT scores is normally not enough. Schools here really want to see your character. They want to know that you're a well-rounded person. So I remember in school knowing a lot of people who went above and beyond to be involved in before and after school extracurricular activities, such as like joining sports teams, clubs. Lots of students also I knew took extra classes like leadership or yearbook, just to show their involvement in the school. And there were also lots of students I know who were involved in volunteer work outside. Some even took up new hobbies to show their uniqueness. So all of that brings us to the college. So many hardworking students, like I mentioned before, feel as if they were rejected from top universities because cheaters entered in their place. So what exactly happened? How did these cheaters cut corners? Here are some examples. Parents bribed coaches and other admissions officials with large cash sums. In many circumstances, payments were made as very charitable donations. Other times, money was wired or just handed, right? To bribe means to pay someone for something in return, usually for something that you're not supposed to have, right? So you can bribe a cop to let you off the hook. Maybe he's going to write you a ticket and you say, hey, how about $50 instead? Right? Okay. So another parent paid the proctor of the SAT $50,000 to give their son a perfect score. And multiple parents photoshopped their children's faces onto athletes' bodies and then were admitted onto sports teams for sports they'd never played. So, according to the New York Times, one girl's parents gave $1.2 million to make her look like a soccer star and get into college. So this sounds like a big problem, right? Yeah, definitely is. A lot of people are talking about it. To state the obvious, some accused institutions are losing credibility. Of course, many Americans are demanding further investigation into potential areas of corruption in the admissions process. Other fraudulent activities are being sought after. As of April 8th, 50 people were charged of fraud. 14 have pleaded guilty. In other words, they have admitted to the crimes that they were accused of. And, well, the investigation continues. As for the sentence for committing a crime like this, well, the one-man singer, who is kind of the ringleader of a lot of this, is going to face probably a significant period of time in prison. However, a lot of these parents, it's really unclear still whether they will face prison time. According to Insider, if so, it'll likely be between 0 and 6 months and maybe some community service, right? So you can form your own opinions about this. I think there are probably a lot of different circumstances of fraud, a lot of charitable donations that are just made and suddenly someone's son or daughter enters the same year. But, hope you enjoyed the topic of today and talk to you next time. Bye.